10 days in, the window's about to shut. Are Newcastle going to move? I don't think so. Hi everyone, welcome back to Evermore YouTube channel. It's Chris back with my rant stroke thought of the day, and it's all about windows. That's right, mini transfer windows, bonus transfer windows, whatever you want to call it. The window's been open from the 1st of June till today, the 10th of June, and barring a miracle, I can't see Newcastle United signing anybody in this small window. Now, I've gone through different emotions in this window, really, and I'll tell you the reasons why in a second, but it could have always been the plan for Newcastle United to never sign anybody in this mini window, to be fair. This mini window was created so clubs could push through signings to play in this ridiculous Club World Cup, which is the biggest money-making spin I've ever seen in my life. It's odious, really. It's horrendous. It's like that random, was it 39th game in the Premier League that they all want to push through in, you know, in Abu Dhabi or Saudi or something like that. It's all about making money. It's nothing to do with, you know, helping players or whatever. You think about the long, arduous seasons these players have had. This thing's just another way to make money. So, yeah, I'm not all for it at all, to be honest with you. And some of the games are shocking as well. You know, like Man City versus, you know, the Austrian champions or I don't know, the Kazakhstan champions or something like that. It's fucking nonsensical, really. But that's enough about that bullshit. I'm talking about Newcastle United here. So it might have always been a plan for Newcastle not to have moved in this mini window, but there is other clubs that have moved in this window, Manchester United being one of them. They've obviously got Kuna in the bag. Newcastle were never interested in Kuna, according to Luke Edwards. I know Luke Edwards gets a bit of shade, but I believe that. I don't think Cuna's an Eddie Howe type of player. I think his attitude's very questionable, and that's why I think Newcastle were nowhere near that player. Brian Mbeumo, though, slightly different. I think he would have been high up on our target list, but he's gone to Manchester United. Now, we don't know what's happened there. Maybe Newcastle approached him and his people, and maybe they said, you know, we want 60 million quid and he wants 250 grand a week, and Newcastle went, nah, thanks a lot guys, see you later, and moved on. That could have been the case, but nobody talks anymore, so you're never gonna know. But there's been loads of targets linked to Newcastle over the last few days, and I think Newcastle will do their business in the second half of this window. But when in the window is the big question. Now, this has all been fueled really by Eddie Howe, in all fairness. People are attacking fans for being a little bit concerned and raising questions, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I'm not a big fan of this steed of righteousness. You know, people ride on and say, oh, yeah, I'm getting worried about, Well, fans are always going to worry. That's football. Football is a game of opinions. And, you know, one person's great performance is another person's shit game, you know, and that football differs in many ways. And because the manager turned around and said that speed was of the essence and the window opened on the 1st of June, naturally people are thinking, well, surely Newcastle are going to make moves now, aren't they? Look at these good players, Delap going and Mbeumo going. Were they not targets? What's happening? So it's only natural for fans to get a little bit nervous and a little bit concerned about what's going on. But the players who have been linked in the last few days, so João Pedro, long-term target for Newcastle. We all remember that infamous Fabrizio Romano tweet that never came to pass. That's a little lesson there to not believe everything Romano tells you, to be honest with you, especially what he's turned into now, which is just a bit of a clickbaiting shit stirrer, really, in many ways, like I said in my last video. But the players linked to the football club, you've got João Pedro and you've got Elanga at Nottingham Forest. Now, the issue I have with this, both decent players, right? 23 years old. I think Eddie Howe will improve them. I do. I think they're good players as it is. You know, João Pedro and Elanga. I've done the Rumour Has It videos. I can talk about them and their qualities. I've done that in the videos. Go check them out. But what Eddie Howe is good at is improving players of that age bracket. 23 years old. He figures out their strengths, looks at their weaknesses, and he decides to try and work on both, you know, and he makes players better. He's made Joe Linton better. He's made Jacob Murphy better. He made Almiron better. He made Longstaff better. You know, more on Longstaff in a second. But he's made players better. And that's what he does for these players. And I think 23 years old is a perfect age to get to Newcastle United under Eddie Howe. You're in that kind of, still in that kind of development as a player bracket. You know, you're not finished as a player. I mean, no players really finish, really, in terms of the finished article until they're probably about 27, 28. But I think kind of between the ages of 20 and 23, you're still very much trying to find your position as a player, work on your game, that kind of a thing, unless you're Messi, obviously, and you just come out of the womb and, you know, doing step-overs and skinning the doctors in the corridors. But I think 23 is a good age for these two players to work under Howe and get better as players. I do question João Pedro's temperament, you know, training ground scraps and stuff like that. I'm not sure whether that's the, you know, harmonious kind of person we want in this dressing room that's been built on, you know, kind of united front and solid, you know, kind of you know, the group ethic and all that kind of stuff, you know. Not solidarity, like band of brothers type thing is what I'm looking for, is the word I'm kind of looking for there. But that, you know, that I don't think João Pedro's that kind of a player, but I might be judging him a bit too quickly. Say the same thing about Anthony Gordon, more on him in a second as well. And he turned out to be great, you know. So that's a decent player. Alanga's a good player, but what concerns me a little bit here is it looks like Newcastle are going to have to drop 120 million quid in these two kids to get them into the football club. Now, it does beg the question. I was listening to True Faith the other day, and Mick Martin was on there. And I love Mick's straight talking tone, you know, when he's on those podcasts. And he made a good point. He said, why aren't we looking at the European market? You know, we've had success there before. I said that in one of my previous videos as well. You know, Bruno, Botman, they came from the European market. Even Joe Litton came from the European market as well. You know, and why aren't we looking there again? Because you could probably get more bang for your buck. You know, I see Bakayoko being available for 20 million. You know, Elanga's, what, 50 or 60? And you think, not worth looking at. Kubo maybe available for 30 or 40 million is a release clause. So potentially Europe is a better market to look at, but I'm not a Newcastle scout. I'm not a head of recruitment, so I don't know what they're going to do. But it sounds like they're going in on João Pedro and Elanga. We'll have to just wait and see how those ones play out. The centre forward position, obviously, that would be taken up by João Pedro, so there'll be nobody else really coming in there. But outgoings of players is a really interesting one. So there's a theory in all of the noise with this, is that Newcastle United are waiting for the PSR deadline to approach, which I think is the 30th of June. Now, The Athletic published something the other day about who's got the most headroom with PSR. Ridiculously, it was Chelsea, Manchester United were up there as well. And you think, what is the fucking point of these rules where it just keeps the big six, you know, in prime position for players? Oh, hang on a minute, I've just told you the point of the rules. There you go. But Aston Villa are in big trouble by the looks of this. They really are sailing close to the wind. I think the wage bill was high. We knew that already. Not getting Champions League football will be a blow for them in terms of their finances. And it sounds like they may need to sell a player or two to cash in. You know, there's already been talk about Emi Martinez going, Tillemans is linked, but the big one is Jacob Ramsey, and there's a lot of talk about Jacob Ramsey going to Newcastle United. And I'm going to do a separate video on this one, but the muted thing is that he's available for 30 million quid, and I think it's a good move for Newcastle United. I'll cover Jacob Ramsey in terms of rumour has and stuff like that and stats, but this talk about swapping Harvey Barnes from absolute fucking nonsense in my eyes. Absolute nonsense. Harvey Barnes is the second best finisher at this football club. He ended this season really, really well, and he showed us what he could do. And I'm not entirely sure Anthony Gordon wants to be at this football club anymore. And shout at me all you want in the comments, but the body language last season was awful. The not joining in the kind of lap of honour. Even the team bus had good view of him before I was outside the Haymarket, and didn't look particularly happy. He's wearing shades and stuff, I suppose, but there's something doesn't look right about Anthony Gordon. And people say he's burned out because he's had too much football. Maybe you're right, maybe he is burned out, but for me, the attitude just doesn't look like a player that wants to be at this football club. And I think he wanted to move to Liverpool, and I still think Luis Diaz may leave Liverpool, and I think if that happens, that will trigger a move for Anthony Gordon. I think Anthony Gordon will leave the football club, and then Harvey Barnes will be the number one left winger. Loads of talk about Grealish on loan. A lot of people shot that down. I wouldn't be against it. I think it's a smart bit of business, in all fairness. If you do lose Gordon and you get money spent in other areas and you get Grealish on loan, he wants to play well. He wants to play himself in that World Cup squad, so maybe it's not a bad move. But I don't want Gordon to leave, but I'm not sure Gordon wants to stay. So that is a big issue for me in terms of transfers. But the other two that are being linked is Sean Longstaff, Leeds United still linked to him, and Joe Willick to Crystal Palace. Now, Sean Longstaff has been a good player for Newcastle. He gets a lot of shit, a lot of people give him abuse, you know, but he has been a good player for Newcastle. You know, Eddie Howe coached him up to levels that we didn't know he had. You know, you think about the brace against Southampton, you think about the goal against PSG. He was excellent that season for us, you know, got us Champions League, and even when we're in the Champions League, he put in some great performances. But I just think the team has evolved to levels that Sean hasn't managed to get to. And with the emergence of Lewis Miley, who I think is a better player, different player to Sean. Sean's more about energy box to box, whereas Lewis Miley's more about composure on the ball, vision of pass, that kind of a thing. You know, and he can finish now as well, the boy. So I think you can't prevent Miley's pathway into the first team picture. And we did that with Elliot Anderson with Sean, and we had to sell Anderson for PSR, and I always thought that Anderson was going to be a better player than Sean anyway, and arguably was when we sold him, and certainly is now. So I think it's time for Sean to move on, and you should go with everyone's great wishes, really. Over 200 appearances for the club, hometown boy, great role model for the youth team players coming through, you know. And if he does go to Leeds United, I think Leeds United will love him as a player. Got a good mate who's a Leeds fan, and they love grafters, and I think Sean will go down a storm at Leeds, and yeah, I think that one will happen. The other one is Joe Willick. Now, going back to the Jacob Ramsey thing, if Jacob Ramsey's available for 30 million quid and Crystal Palace want Joe Willick for 25 million, that's smart business, because Joe Willick fit and on form is a great player. But when have we said Joe Willick fit and on form over the last 2 years, potentially? Injuries have taken a toll on the lad. He comes in, does a job for a bit, then he gets a knock and he's out for 7, 8, 9 weeks. He's not just out for 1 or 2 weeks. And I just think that maybe Joe Willick has reached the end of his role with Newcastle United, and maybe a freshen up in that position is key. You know, you've got Joe Litton, Bruno and Tonali's the front three midfield. Lewis Mile underneath that. If you throw Jacob Ramsey in there, maybe another player, get a bit of a freshness underneath that three midfield, because we will need a squad rotate next season, and you can't rely on Joe Willick's fitness levels. You just can't. It's just not going to happen. But I think there will be some moves in the second half of the window, which is what I think Newcastle are waiting to do. So let's see what happens in the next week or so. But I just thought I'd come on, do a little quick thought on the transfer situation. Trafford's another one. I think that'll happen in the second half of the window. One of our many keepers will go, whether it be Vlachodimos, whether it be Dubravka. I think John Ruddy might stay on as a goalkeeper stroke coach. Maybe Nick Pope even. But I think Pope will probably stay. My money's more on Dubs to leave, I think, in this transfer window. But I think we're all going to find out what Newcastle are going to do in the second half of this window. This first one's been a little bit frustrating because nothing's happened and there's been no talk. But I've seen some of the local journalists starting to circulate stories about how Newcastle still have their goals and their plans and their targets, and they're going to push through in the second half of the window. So I think that's the club almost subtly telling the fans not to worry about saying it outright. Of course, the journalists are breaking glass and doing another story on the stadium that never seems to be moving forward, which again is another deflection tactic to the lack of transfers by the club. We see through you like a play in the glass, lads. Come on. But let us know what you think about the transfer window so far. This mini window, did you think we were ever going to make any moves? And are you confident we're going to get players in the second half of the window? Loads of names linked. Let me know who you think the club will end up with, rather than who you want, or who do you want, and do you think the club can realistically get them? We always like to hear from you. Drop a like, subscribe, keep it ever more. We're close to 10,500. The goal is 11 next. Share us with family and friends, all free content. Have a cracking day wherever you are, and we'll see you later. Cheers.
Heroes celebrate. They have done it.